go ahead and take a look at Nurbs Surfaces and Curves. So Nurbs Surfaces and Curves are kind of an interesting way of making geometry. It feels a bit older to me just because that was like one of the only ways that you can make surfaces a long time ago. But this is more of like a mathematical description based off of curves and then generating surfaces from that and then kind of stitching surfaces together. So with polygon modeling and the advances with that, you're able to do a lot of the things that you're able to do with the Nurbs surfaces, but maybe not with some of the restrictions and things like that. But the one thing that I think is kind of interesting about these and why we should maybe even take a look at it is because it is possible to generate really smooth surfaces that feel probably a bit more like something that you would see in the automotive industry. And if you're used to drawing with curves and other programs, you might feel somewhat comfortable on this. I'm going to just show you there's a lot of different techniques that goes into Nurbs, so I'm just going to show you a very simple thing, and that's if we generate 4 different curves that we see here. Let me go ahead and select this one and then the back curve. So you would need 4 different curves, and then we're going to make a surface out of that, make a boundary surface from that. And then we can go ahead and mirror that across. We have to convert this Nurbs surface into polygons, and at that point we can do whatever we want with them like we're used to. But it might be, like I was saying, it might be an interesting way for you to generate kind of complex surfaces that are really, really clean and smooth. So I'm going to go ahead and take the polys, let's convert it on there, and I'll take everything that I made with the Nurbs surfaces and I'll go ahead and hide that. So what we're going to be doing is working with Nurbs curves at the very beginning. Like I showed you, we have those 4 curves, and then from those 4 curves we're going to generate a surface, a boundary surface. So let's go to create, and then let's go to curve tools, and let's just go ahead and tear this off. So there's 2 different ways that we can kind of work. There's actually more, but I'll show you this. The CV curve tool, that means control vertex. So if we're on the perspective view like this, we start clicking out like this, and we're going to start drawing a curve that is going to be attached to this plane that you see here. So we're building off the floor plane that we have here. Okay, so if I hit insert, I could actually move some of these points around. I'm going to hit backspace, and we can go back to the very beginning on this. And if I go here, I'm just going to hold down X and then just snap to the grid on here, and then I'm going to snap to the grid here as well. So I'm holding down X while I'm moving, and I'll tap insert to go back out of that. And the weird thing about this tool that I think is kind of odd is you don't actually start drawing a curve until you hit point, point, and if you hold down X and draw another point, we need 1, 2, 3, 4 points to start actually drawing what the curve is on here. And you can see that these points, these control vertices, are approximations to move this actual curve here. So I know that probably feels a little bit odd at the very beginning, but I'm just going to hold down X, and I'm going to continue to try to snap to the grid like this. And I think that looks interesting enough. I'll go ahead and hit enter for that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this away from the center of the origin here. So I'm going to hold down X and just move this over like this. Okay, so now if I select the curve and we're in object mode, if I hit F9 to do my vertices, or right click and you can say control point, it's kind of a similar thing. Let's see, I'm going to right click on here and say control vertex. We can get back to these points that we created and we can move them around like this. So I'm just going to manipulate this just a little bit. So it's kind of flexible. You can kind of see how we can kind of manipulate this. Once you get used to the fact that you're going to control vertice that's somewhere in the vicinity of where that curve sits, and it's not going to sit directly on there, then you'll get a little bit used to working this way. So I'm just going to kind of move these out this way just a little bit more like this. And the next thing I want to tell you about is if we hit F8 and go back to our object mode, there's nothing to really kind of snap onto this. So if we go to display and we go to Nurbs and then we go to edit points, we can show edit points for that, but I'm going to tear this off because we're going to use that quite a bit. So I'll just leave this here and I'll leave this here. So I'm going to turn on edit points. And you can kind of see these little X's. That's going to allow you to actually snap to these. So there are like kind of like vertices at that point. So I know this is a bit odd coming from Polygons and then switching over to this. But let's just go ahead and do another CV curve tool. And I can hold down V and I can snap to this point. I'm going to hit spacebar and go to the front view. And then I'm going to draw out from there. I'm going to hold down X and then snap here. And then I'm going to start drawing the curve. And I'll hold down X and then snap here like this. I'll hit enter. Now as I'm looking at this, I didn't quite realize that when I moved this around, I must have moved these points around a little bit. So they're kind of sticking up in this axis. I'll double click on my move tool and make sure that my move and snap settings, I have retained component spacing off and I'm set to axis orientation, set to world. And I can hold down X and I can just snap that right down to the grid there. So I know everything's nice and flat now at this point. So I'm going to turn on the edit points for this one. And I'm just going to go ahead and change the pivot point of this. So I'm going to tap D and I can hold down V. And I can move that right here and snap to that point. I'll tap D again, and that releases that. So now I can hit Control D, and that'll duplicate. We can duplicate our object that way. And so we've got this curve, and I'm just going to move it back, and I'm going to hold down V, and I'm going to snap to this control. This actually edit point is what it's considered. So I'll hit F9 on this again, or you can right click and say Control Vertice, and I'll move this over and hold down X, and I'll snap to the center. So let's go to the front and make sure I'm actually snapped up. Okay, so I'm just tapping spacebar in between these. Then on this one, let's go ahead and move this over a bit. And if I want it to just sit in the same spot, I'll hold down V and then snap to this point. Doesn't seem to like to do that, so I'm just going to move this over just like this. So just going to move this point just like this. And then we're pretty close to having everything we need. We need our last curve that we have here. What I can do is just take this curve that we have here, and I could tap D, hold down V, and I could snap the pivot point to here. Tap D again for that. And I'll just duplicate this curve, and I'll hold down V, and I'll move it, and I'll snap it here. Now I'm going to put it on the rotate tool. You can tap E for that. If you hold down J, you can click, and you can rotate this and snap to degrees of increments of rotation. And that comes in pretty handy. So now with this curve, I'm going to tap F9 and I'm going to start to manipulate these points on here. And I'm just going to move this back here, move this one here, move this here like this. And I'll try to do something that's kind of interesting, like some kind of car shape. So it's really up to you what you want to do with this shape of yours. But this is what I was saying, where it can be kind of fun and interesting to use this as a creation method, just because you can really focus on the shape of the curve, and that's going to be the thing that builds your surface for you. So I'm going to do this here like that. And then because I like this as the sweep of the center of whatever this body is going to be, what I'm going to do is take this curve that we have here and I'm going to snap it to this here. So I'm going to hold down V and then snap up here, and then this will become the beginning of that surface on the back here like this. Okay. So I should have everything I need to create our surface. So I'm going to select the curves. I don't think the order matters too much, but I'm going to try to go in either a counterclockwise or clockwise direction for this. And then if we go under surfaces, there's a boundary surface, and then we can click on this. You can see curve ordering can be automatic or as selected. And I'll put this as NURBS. I'm just going to hit apply for this. Now it's going to shade black because the surface is pointing inward. So this could be another thing where this might be a little bit confusing. These curves actually have a direction to them, so it's kind of like a normal direction, but it's not really. It's a curve. So you can go to curves, and you can say reverse direction, and you might have to reverse a few of them till it points the surface outward, but it should be pretty easy to get to that. Now I've already made a blend material, so I just selected this object, right click, and said assign new material, and just said blend. And I'll show you the blend material that I have set up for this. So if I hit Control A and take the blend, I just took the color and then drug it down a little bit darker, took the specular color and drug this up, and then eccentricity, drug that up a little bit like this. And that's going to give you a really nice material to kind of look at with these more like metal like surfaces that you have here. So the interesting thing about this is we've got these curves, we got this surface that we have, and then what we can do, these curves are actually live still. So if we select this curve here, and if we right click and say Control Vertex C like that, you can see that we can manipulate the shape on this. And so that's another thing that's kind of powerful about this, is that if you want to kind of tweak out a shape and do some shape exploration, I think that could be a pretty powerful thing for you to do for that. Now with the surface, there's ways to manipulate that by itself too, but I'm just trying to go to these curves themselves and then just manipulate just the curves. So I'm going to push this back a little bit. I'm not going to be too worried about the surface that I'm creating, just because we're doing an example here. But again, I think you could spend quite a bit of time just really finessing a surface and getting very, very specific about what it is that you want to create. So I think that definitely is super powerful. So I'm going to push this in just a little bit more. So I think that's pretty cool as a shape. Now if I do want to do this, if I want to manipulate these two curves, I can select one curve, hold down shift, select the other curve, and I should be able to get to multiple points at one time. So if I hold down control and shift, I can add to a selection here like this, and I could pull all these points down all at one point and one time and just try to manipulate these. The other thing that you can do is if you hit the up and down arrow key, it's over there by your control key off to the right in between your number pad. If you hit up and down or left and right, you can cycle between these points. So if it ever becomes kind of difficult to select them, you could just cycle through them like that and kind of push them around. So again, just a different way of creating surfaces this way. So here's the curves. It might be beneficial to just select them, hit Control G, just maybe call these curves, and hit Control G and maybe call this surfaces. And then what I want to do with this is now take this and convert this from Nurbs to polygons. So we've already looked at how to convert Smooth Mesh Preview into polygons. It's the same area. It's modify, convert Nurbs to polygons. And let's just go ahead and let it do its thing. I'm going to hide the Nurbs surface. I'm going to hit Control H for that. Let's just select our surface, and you can see it's really, really low res. If we go to the options over here, if I change this type and U and V, that's a direction for this. So it's almost like UV's on a mesh. It's just the flow and the direction of the surface. You can say this per surface. Let's do per span of isoparms, and if we do 3 and there, and then 3 and V, you can see we get some pretty good options on there. So you could change those numbers if you want. You could do 4, so you could up the resolution of it. If you did 1 and 1, you're going to get the same exact thing that if you took a look at these these edit points. This is where it becomes a little bit interesting. This is actually creating geometry on each one of these edit points like this, right? So it's almost like our base cage for our polygon modeling. But then if we wanted to up this, if we do 2 and then 2, this is almost like doing a subdivision level like what we did before. And then if we do 3 and 3, that's really close to taking a base cage and then doing the smooth mesh preview version on it. So that's it's kind of like you're doing that directly with the Nurbs surfaces like that. So the other interesting thing is this is all still live. So if I want to go back and then go to my control vertices and I am not super happy with that shape, or if I want to really tweak this and make this maybe a little bit more aggressive as a shape, I can do that. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this Nurbs Topology, I'm just going to duplicate it. I'm going to hide this one here, and I'll hide the curves. And if I built everything correctly, I should be able to duplicate this. I'm going to hit Control D again, and then give it a negative scale and X. And then everything should snap up. So I could take these two surfaces like this, and then just go Mesh Combine. And I'm going to delete history on it, Alt-Shift-D. And I'm not sure how accurate this was. Let's just try this. I'm going to select my vertices, right click, and we say vertice, and just select them all. And if these things sit directly on top of each other, I should be able to shift right click and go merge vertices and use the merge vertices option box, and then do a really like low threshold like 0.0001. Hit apply for that. And if we tap 3 and we do the smooth mesh preview, if we did this correctly and everything's snapped up, you can see it joins the surfaces together for us pretty nicely like that. So if we tap 1 to go back to our base cage, the reason that we see this split down here is that we have a hard edge through here. After we've merged the vertices, we can go to select this, we can go to mesh display, and we can just say soften edge, and that's another way to check and make sure everything's kind of joined up really nice like that. So I'll tap 3 again for that, and again this can be a really nice way for us to generate a surface. Okay, so from here I'm going to bounce directly into resurfacing. So here's my thought on this. What we could potentially do is use those techniques that we just did to make this really clean surface. But then what if we just want this as a shape, but we're going to have to try to get it more complex with our modeling? What we can do is make this surface live. So if you go up here, you've got this little magnet icon, and then this makes the selected object live. So if we do that, it doesn't look like any change happens. You can't select it anymore. But if we go into the modeling toolkit and we go into the quad draw tool, let's go hit the quad draw tool, and let's do symmetry. And because this is in the origin of the world, I'm going to use symmetry, and I'm going to do world X like this. And so this tool, because the surface is live, if we click on here, we can start to drag out these points. And you can see how it just snaps to the surface like this. That becomes a pretty cool thing for us. We're going to make one point, click and drag out. I'm going to make another point. I'm going to try to get it right here in the corner. And then I'll click and drag another point and another point. And the way that this tool works is if you have 4 points like this, if you hold down Shift, you can just see it's going to preview for making an actual polygon, and you can just click, and then it'll make a polygon for you. Okay. If we hold down Tab, we can drag out. And if we have the polygons with these verts that you see here, you can just click on the verts and you can move them around. And so this is a, think of this as like 3D tracing. So it's kind of cool that we have the surface, and from having the surface, we can just drag out these points and hold down Shift like that. And I'm going to lay down another point and another point here, hold down Shift. And if we drag them really close together, we should get these points to just snap together pretty easily. So it's kind of like the target weld tool that we've been looking at already. So if we hold down Tab and then click and drag out, that is going to drag out just one of the, it's like an extruding of a face. And I wish I could tell you why that is not working so well. Maybe these didn't actually get joined together. So sometimes if you hold down shift, you can relax the surface. And I'm just trying to get these to actually snap together. Okay, so that's why I wasn't extruding. I'd love to say I was making a mistake, but sometimes it just doesn't behave the way that I would hope for. You'll probably encounter that too, I'm sure. So I'm going to hold down tab, and then this time if I, instead of left mouse dragging out, if you hold down middle mouse with tab, you can drag out, and it'll drag like an entire section out. So I can snap these up here like that. So let me show you this, because this will be a little bit more obvious this time. Hold on tab and then middle mouse, and then I can drag out the entire thing like this, and that is definitely a very very good feature. So I'm going to hold down shift like this, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to turn the surface here. So another thing that we can do on this, I can hold down shift and control, and I can delete out points like this. So I'm just doing this kind of quickly just to kind of show you that, so we can snap that together. Again, control and shift will delete out a polygon, and if you do control and shift, you can delete out an entire like edge loop. So I'm going to make something like a windshield. So I'm going to do this here. So I'm going to do this quad, and I need to start turning the geometry. So I'm building another quad off of it like this. You can see that we can continue out here like this, and we're going to still have just quad geometry at that point. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to hold down tab and then just drag this out. So you've got a lot of different options on what you can do for this. Now, the other thing that's like really interesting about this tool is once you've got some geometry created, and I try to figure out a pattern first before I get more complex, you can hold down control, and it's just like the multi-cut tool and inserting a loop. So we can insert that, and you can see as we add geometry, it's automatically snapping to the surface. So I can quickly make geometry like this. Now if I hold down shift, we can relax the surface and these points, and that becomes a really nice, powerful thing. If we tap B to turn on or off our soft modification tool, and if you don't see it at about the same scale that you see here, sometimes I have to go double click on the move settings, go to the soft selection, and then maybe drag the fall off radius kind of a lot lower like this. I'm going to go back into the quad draw tool. So I can tap B and then click and drag left and right, and that'll increase or decrease the size for this. So what's kind of cool about this, if you have the soft mod, if you hold on shift, you can relax the whole surface, like all these points, really, really quickly. Now we do have some settings on here that it's not going to relax the outer part, and that's because this auto lock, I'm not going to mess with that. I tend to just leave that alone. And then if I need to move some of these outer points like this, I just move these by hand. So it's possible to go in here with the settings, and you can play around with that if you want to try that out. So here we go with this surface, and again, if I've gone too complex with this already, which I really don't need this much geometry at the beginning. We can hold down Control and Shift, and then we can get rid of these loops that we placed within here. So we can simplify the geometry like that. And again, I think my personal opinion is to work like at a lower resolution at the very beginning. Let the computer do as much work as possible for you. And here's where I'm going to try to turn the surface again. So I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to take this point and then just snap it just like that. So if you see what I did here, we've got geometry flowing this way and this way, and I want to kind of do the same trick that if we take a cube and turn it into a sphere, this is kind of the pattern that you'll see happening with that. So now we got this flowing up this way, and then we're bringing geometry back over from here. So I'm just holding down shift and then doing a relax. Just spacing these out. Kind of like that. And then the other thing you could do is, if you know you got to cover a large area, I could do something like, we hold down tab and we can hold down the middle mouse and then drag that out. If I know that I'm going to keep this same kind of pattern like this, I can hold down control and I can just put a span here, here, and here like that, and I'm just very quickly making this surface. So I'm going to hold down tab and middle mouse and drag that whole thing out like that, and I'll start to curve this geo up a bit like this, and I'm going to pull these together and I'm going to do that same thing we did before. So I'm going to start to turn this around through here. And sometimes it's I have to kind of get in closer, like view-wise, in order for it to actually make the geo that I'm expecting. Like it can't find it or something, so it's got some kind of issue with line of sight or something like that. I can't tell you the exact the reasons for why it doesn't want to make the geo sometimes, but I've just found that sometimes I got to zoom in and take a look at the topology that way. And then like this, I could not grab that vertice. So if I hold down shift, it kind of relaxes the surface a little bit, and you can kind of grab that vert on there. Let's see, I'm going to try to get in through here. I'm just going to relax this a little bit like this. And so I think that's pretty good. So I can click out of the quad draw tool just by picking here. I can hide this. I can make it not live anymore, so let's just go ahead and hide that. And here's the new geo that we made. I'm going to go ahead and right click and I'm going to assign that blend material to it, and it tends to make everything this kind of faceted hard edge. We can just go to mesh display and then go to soften edge. Now if we tap 3 for a smooth mesh preview of this, you can see we've got a pretty nice surface to start working with. And we've already looked at how we can do creasing and things like that. So if we do Control Shift X, or we bring back the multi-cut tool, we could add additional splits into this and then start to refine this geo a little bit. Just like that. Okay. So I'm not going to put that one in there. I didn't quite like what it was producing. So that's a way that you can generate really smooth surfaces, that you could resurface it and then get the geometry to be very specific. Now I just did a shape that's kind of hinting at the fact that there would be a windshield. You know, you could plan this out a lot better and make sure that this is the top panel and that you've got maybe some side beams and everything else like that. So yeah, this is a very, very simplistic shape still, and if we were doing something like a car, then we could start to build some wheel wells and stuff like that. But that gives you a shape to start building the geometry off of. So like once that shape is made, you can kind of explore with your topology and have a bit more confidence working that way. Okay, so that's how to generate the surfaces. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to show you how to jump directly into using a lattice deformer. So that's another modeling tool that people use, and I think it's pretty powerful as well. It's a way of deforming this object and manipulating it with some very simple points. So under modeling, I'm going to delete history, Alt-Shift-D on this, and then we're going to go ahead and let me just go ahead and duplicate this surface, and then I'll hide it just so it's nice and safe and we don't have to worry about messing it up. So under the modeling tool set, we've got deform, and let's take a look at lattice deformer. We'll do the option box for this. I think the only change that I might make to this, let me reset the settings. So the default settings for these divisions are 2, 5, and 2. I'm just going to make this 2 by 2 by 2, and then I'm going to group the base and lattice together. It should center around the selection, which is our object. Let's just go ahead and hit apply, and you'll see what's going to happen here. So with those settings, 2 by 2 by 2, and if we go to the channel box over here, it's just going to give us this very simple lattice. So we can right click on this and say lattice points, and you can see if I select one of these, and I can change this, and I can basically warp it. We do have symmetry on, so let me turn symmetry off. That way you can see if I just drug one point out, we could manipulate the surface that way with just one point. If we drag and select multiple points, just like they're kind of like vertices, you can see how we can manipulate the surface like this. We can do things like rotate, and you can rotate, you can scale and manipulate them. So for stylized stuff, if you wanted to do kind of a cartoon warping effect, this could be a pretty powerful thing for you to do. But just changing surfaces becomes pretty powerful as well. I wish we could manipulate this and then go back and change these divisions, because I'm going to show you about these divisions now. If you want more fidelity within here, you can, I'm going to click on here, and I'm just middle mouse dragging left or right. And so that's going to give me a division going down the center here. And if I do, this is like, you know, Y. And then if I do this one here, the last one, this is like the depth of it. And again, what I was saying would be nice is if I had a little bit more control over that, where after I've done some edits to this, then I could maybe change the resolution of this. One thing that's kind of interesting is you could put a lattice deformer on a lattice deformer. So this one's complex, and then I could do a more simple lattice deformer over the top of it like we just looked at. So you can kind of stack these on top of each other. So I'm just going to select the front of this, and I'm going to put it on the scale tool, and I'm going to scale this part out so I could kind of fatten up the front end of this, kind of like that. And then maybe I want to fatten up the back end of that, just like that. And then maybe I wanted to take this part, and I'm going to pull it down and make it, maybe it's going to make it look a little more sporty. The other thing we could do is grab all the ones on the bottom. If we scale them out, we can kind of go and kind of start to flatten the shape of that like this. And I'm just going to move this forward just a little bit. So now you can keep this on there, and you can keep this alive. That's possible for you to do. What I would suggest is if you're happy with the shape, you're probably going to want to delete the history on it. So Alt-Shift-D, and that's going to delete the history. But I'll just go ahead and leave it. The other thing we could do is if you want to leave the history on, you can hit Control-D to duplicate your object, and then I can hide these parts here, and then that basically gives me a new copy and kind of flattens it, but keeps the history on this stuff. And if you, I'm getting really messy over here, but if you're kind of organized with things, you can keep them in the different stages, right? So you could keep your curves, and then your surfaces, and then your Nurbs topologies, and then you could do your lattice, and then you can do like your final surface and keep all those different stages. So if you needed to get back to anything, you would at least have the option for that, to do that at that point. Okay, so there is the lattice deformer. Now the other deformer, I think there's some other ones. There's wrap deformer, which is pretty interesting, which would let you use a mesh, and then you could deform other meshes based off of that mesh. So it's kind of like your own custom lattice deformer. That one's maybe getting a little too advanced on there, but I'll do this non-linear, and we can take a look at a bend deformer. So if we go to deform, nonlinear, and bend, if you do the option box for it, you can see that we've got this high bound and low bound. I'm just going to rotate this. I'm going to tap E to rotate it along the length of this, and I'll just put this at 90. And then if I do curvature, you can see that we can start to curve or bend this surface in this direction. So let's just say I wanted a 45-degree bend on this, but instead of this direction, maybe I want to rotate it and I'm going to bend the surface up this way. Let's just go ahead and turn on wireframe unshaded real quick like this so we can see what's going on here. So if I want exact deformation, I can rotate this to 90 degrees this direction, and if I wanted to bend it down, then I could go do a negative 90 degrees on this. And depending on the low bound, you can see that you could have it just bend the front half of that thing. I can do -1 for this, or this high bound, we could just bend the back half of that. And depending if you grow that out even further, it's going to control the surface and how it bends out from there. Obviously, if you click this and then I'm middle mouse dragging with control to get finer control on this, you can interactively change the bend amount on this, just like this. And so, you know, if I wanted this to be a 90-degree bend, we can do that. And we're starting to kind of conform this into a sphere just a little bit, and that I don't know, that could be an interesting shape. So let's just say I like this, and I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate that. And again, I'm going to hide those previous stages. I'm going to turn off the grid real quick. Tap 1 to just see our mesh here like this. And then let's try to do this. Let's do, I'm going to do my edges, right click and say edge, select these. Let's do these 3 edges and then these 3 edges. And let's do a bridge. So I'm going to shift right click and say bridge, and it should bridge in between there. And if I hit Control Shift X, that's going to do our multi-cut tool that we got here. And then I can hold down Control and then drag within through here, and I'm going to make a split here like this. And what I'm going to do is start to bridge these together. So I'm going to hit F10, or you can right click and say edge. And I'm going to select this edge and then this edge, and then shift right click and say bridge. Select this one. Oops, undo. I'll tap G for my last command. Tap G for my last command. And we can select this one and this one. Tap G. We can bridge this together, and then this one and this one. And then we've basically closed that surface off. That's not going to look so great, so we'd probably have to manipulate this just a little bit so it's just not so flat. I mean, if you wanted it flat, it's up to you, but you're going to have to kind of see what the geometry gives you for that. So I'm just going to try to move these up a little bit and then just try to follow just a little bit of this curvature that we see in here. So I know this is very quick and pretty dirty, but I just want to see what this looks like. So let's just go to Mesh Display and do Soften Edge like this. And I'll tap 3, and you can see we're starting to close that shape out and get some kind of, who knows, funky futuristic VW bug or something like that. So I'm going to shift right click and just say mirror, and my options are set to mirror across the x-axis like that. I'll delete history, and you can see I've got the makings of some cool little sci-fi something or another. I don't know if it's a car or some kind of vehicle, right? Okay, so I think that's a pretty good amount to kind of take a look at right now for topology. I think it's a pretty good overview of a lot of different techniques. Obviously, the longer that you model, you're going to keep finding more and more that you can kind of work with. I know one thing that we haven't really touched on is booleans, and then kind of fixing surfaces up from that. Again, this information is running a little bit long, so that's probably worthy of an entire another entire video. But The biggest thing about booleans is you have to have clean geometry, and then unfortunately with Maya it seems like there's quite a bit of cleanup work, and it really doesn't matter what program that I've seen people doing booleans in. If you do booleans, you're gonna have to do some work on the model to kind of clean it up and get the results that you're looking for. So no matter what the program is, there's going to be some work that's going to have to be done for that. Okay, so this will wrap up the section on some of the little bit more advanced topics on topology, but yeah, I think with this tool set, you should be able to make quite a few different shapes.